My name is Rochelle Theopien, and I'm the curator at the Broward County Main Library in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I'm accompanied by Steve Rodeberg, our programming services videographer. We're here today on Wednesday, July 16th, 2025, to interview Nelson Martin Lissabet for the Library of Congress Veterans History Project. Mr. Lissabet, thank you for your service.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
I'd love to begin the interview with the beginning of you. How about we start with where you were born and what your early life was like?
I was born in Bridgeport, Connecticut, April 11th, 1949, to Cuban immigrant parents. Bridgeport, Connecticut, during World War II was a heavy munitions place where lots of things were made to assist the military. And my parents were immigrants who actually met in Bridgeport and who tried to take advantage of the jobs that were available there in the 1940s.
Yes, so they came from Cuba. Did they talk about their life in Cuba before they came here?
Oh, sure. Yeah. We talked numerous times about that. We later moved to New York, where I lived in a part of Queens called Astoria. I was about 4 years old, I think, and we lived there for about 5 years. And then in 1958, we moved down here to South Florida, and I grew up in a little city called Opa-locka.
So do you remember where you went to school in Opa-locka?
Yes, I went to, in the 4th grade, Golden Glades Elementary. For about 2 years, I went to Our Lady of Perpetual Help Catholic School in the 5th and 6th grades. We then went to Parkway Junior High School, which was a brand new school, and later Miami Carroll City Senior High School, which was also a brand new school. I was one of the first students in both those schools when they opened in the early 60s.
Is it that you are an only child?
Oh, no.
You
no.
had siblings?
Yes. I have 3 sisters and 1 brother. I'm the oldest. Mm-hmm. And they're smarter than me, but I'm wiser.
Well, you seem pretty smart to me, sir. I want to talk a little bit more about your parents and your family life. Did your father work in a specific industry? Did your mom stay home and take care of the kids? Give me some more information about that.
My mother worked for Sears most of her adult life down here, and later for another retail company, the name of which I cannot recall. It doesn't exist anymore. But she was involved in credit, and she had to work because there were simply 5 of us that they had to take care of. My father was a baker. He worked for the Royal Castle Commissary baking location, where they made all of the buns and the hamburger rolls and the rest of it. And in addition to the 5 of us, we often had cousins that lived with us who came from Cuba as refugees, from 9 to 15, living with us at least for several years until they were able to begin to go out on their own.
Definitely, a very different life sometimes, and otherwise sometimes very much the same in South Florida, right?
Right.
Now, you went to high school. What was it like in high school? Did you feel like you were ready for a vocation? Did you have any ideas? And what year was it? And what was going on in the country around that time?
Well, when I was about 14 years old, I decided that I would like to join the Marine Corps. And it was during that particular year in 1963 that John Kennedy was assassinated. I was 14 at the time, and I remember specifically exactly where I was and what I was doing, who the teachers were. I was in band class at the time. And I was in the 9th grade, and I finished going to school there, where I graduated in 1967. And right after graduation, I was at boot camp 2 months later in August of 1967 at Parris Island.
So you enlisted?
I did enlist.
You enlisted.
Yes.
And how did your family feel about your enlistment? Obviously, they knew you had designs on becoming part of the military. What did they think about your plans, your dreams for yourself? Did they have any opinions they expressed to you about that? I'm sure the atmosphere at the time, we're getting toward Vietnam War time.
Yes, they were very much concerned about Vietnam, which was increasing. They were not particularly happy about my wanting to join the Marine Corps. They didn't really pressure me not to, but they tried to dissuade me by encouraging me to maybe go to junior college and or try to work at least for a while in order to kind of get my oats, so to speak. But I didn't listen to any of it. I simply joined the Marine Corps. As a matter of fact, I actually joined before graduating from high school in April of 1967. When I turned 18, I went to the recruiters, and I actually signed up at that time with the stipulation that I would go to boot camp after graduating from high school.
And at that time you were single?
Yes.
Okay. So you're a single young man, you've just become an adult, and you're in boot camp.
Correct.
Tell me about the experience in boot camp. First of all, did any of your friends join up with you?
I actually ran into people that I knew from my high school at the same boot camp. They were in different units, but I specifically remember two that I knew and spoke to, and oh yeah, I know you from Carroll City. And so the answer is yes. And then as time went on, the Marine Corps is not very big, so you run into the same people over again. As time went on in the Marine Corps, I ran into other friends who were a little younger than me and joined the Marines later. And I ran into one at Camp Geiger when I was back from Vietnam, who was on his way to Vietnam. And I ran into another friend in Okinawa, of all places. He turned out to be a cook, and I knew him from my neighborhood. So yeah, you do tend to run into friends that you knew from your town, at least when it comes to the Marine Corps.
So you're in boot camp, and obviously this is your first experience in the military.
Yes.
Tell me what it was like.
Well, all of the stories that one tends to hear about boot camp tends to be true. Sometimes there's exaggeration, but it's hard to exaggerate that particular kind of experience. It was exhausting. It was enlightening to the degree of, did I really want to do this? But too late now, here I am. But it also began to instill a certain pride that I found myself being able to do it. Boot camp was very difficult physically. More so, it was actually more difficult psychologically. And
tell me a bit about that. You're there and you're surrounded by a lot of people, all in the same boat, but all from different cultures. Tell me what it was like psychologically for you to endure some of this, maybe a specific incident that stands out to you or an individual.
Well, I remember that one individual in my platoon cussed out the drill instructor through his rifle and walked out of ranks because the drill instructor was giving him a hard time. And that's the only time I ever witnessed anything like that. That individual later had other problems, and I don't know if he was discharged or not, but I remember that he did not graduate with us. The drill instructors were all Vietnam veterans themselves, and I personally believe that, in retrospect, that they all had their own psychological issues in regards to post-traumatic stress disorder, etc. And their method of training was a way for them to be able to express whatever difficulties they were going to psychologically. And they also knew what we were in for, and they tried to prepare us as best they could for what was going to come. But it was not easy, and they could be very mean and even physical from time to time.
Were you trained on any specific artillery or equipment?
I was a plain grunt. My MOS was 0311, which translates to infantry rifleman. In the Army, it's 11 Bravo, same thing, plain old grunt. I did train in being able to fire an M60 machine gun, but that was just part of regular IRT training, infantry regiment training that we received at Camp Lejeune, in a part of Camp Lejeune called Camp Geiger, after graduating from boot camp, and how to throw grenades, etc. But other than that, I did not receive any training for any other kind of weapon, like mortars or laws or things of that nature. I never fired any of those weapons.
So how long were you at Camp Lejeune, and once you completed that, what happened next?
I arrived at Camp Lejeune in October of 1967, the day after graduating from boot camp in Parris Island. It's a big hoopla day. My parents were there along with my small brothers and sisters, and they watched the parade and the rest of it. At Camp Lejeune, it was basically a continuation of some of the basic kinds of things, but now getting into a more formal aspect of actual infantry training. Most of the time was spent in the bush, conducting simulated ambushes, night warfare, having to stand guard, trying to stay awake all night, things of that nature. Very difficult, very draining.
But you completed it?
Yes, I did complete it.
What happened next?
Well, after that, I came home for 20 days for leave. My orders was Westpac, which meant Western Pacific, which for the Marine Corps almost always meant Vietnam. Remember that the Marine Corps is under the Department of the Navy, so a lot of Navy vocabulary is used. And Westpac was Western Pacific, meaning the Navy in that particular area. So after my leave, I went to Camp Pendleton, California, and I had another month of infantry training, a lot of humping, a lot of going up and down hills, more night training, particularly night training in being able to find your way to a certain location, and just preparing to arrive in Vietnam. That lasted about a month. New Year's Eve took place while I was at Camp Pendleton, going into January of 1968. And then I arrived in Vietnam around the 22nd or 23rd of January 1968, about 1 week before the Tet Offensive hit.
Yes, and I remember reading about that in some of your letters, so I'd really like you to tell us about that.
When I arrived in Vietnam, I was initially assigned to security platoon of the 1st Marine Headquarters Battalion. Part of our job was essentially sentry duty on the hills looking down into what we referred to then as Elephant Valley, which was a deep valley where supposedly there were active Viet Cong units as well as North Vietnamese. Behind us on the ridge was the house of the general of the 1st Marine Division, and just numerous supplies, PX, helicopter helipads, and about 3 miles away was Da Nang Airport, Da Nang Airfield. We overlooked the Elephant Valley, and to our right was the ocean, which was quite beautiful, with these little stone mountains, if you like, in the middle of the water, quite unusual. And that's where I was, and I was there for 7 days. When Tet hit, we were attacked by sappers in the morning of January 30th going into January 31st. And it was my first combat. It was terrifying. The funny thing about terror is it's not really fear, it transcends fear. It causes you to have difficulty controlling your body and what you want to do. I remember that the main thought I had at that particular time while the attack was going on was that whatever happens, I must not drop my rifle, because my 9-pound M16 weighed about 900 pounds, and I had a hard time holding it and holding it up. I never saw any of the enemy. They blew numerous bunkers. We had rockets that were fired over our heads that landed in the heliport behind us, and also at Da Nang Airfield, which lit up like it was 12 o'clock noon. And remember, this is in the middle of the night. And helicopters coming over and shooting down at where the enemy was located and shooting their rockets. Bunkers being blown up by Viet Cong. We suffered a few killed, and so did they. So did the enemy. Again, I never fired my rifle. I never saw an enemy soldier, even though they were around us. I did everything wrong. When the shooting started, I went into the bunker. They always tell you to get out of the bunker. The individual that was with me had two weeks in country, so it was his first combat as well. So there we were, two boot Marines trying to do our job, doing everything wrong, scared as hell, trying to figure out what was going on, and at the very least not making a fool out of myself in front of the enemy by dropping my rifle, of all things. It was difficult to stop my knees from shaking. And that's when I realized why soldiers who are in combat for the first time don't usually run away, is because they can't hardly move. So, so that was rather enlightening. And
when that happened, and once it was over, Were reinforcements sent in?
Yes.
Okay.
But by that time, it was all over. The enemy had gone their way. They had, I don't know if they left any of their casualties behind. The next day, we had tanks coming up to our area. I guess we could have used them the night before. We didn't need them now, but anyway, that's how it went. And I stayed at that location for a few more months. I did not see any more combat. I was not involved in any more combat for those months. We were not attacked again. And I was there until, I believe it was June or July, when I was transferred to the 27th Marine Regiment, which was southwest of Da Nang, close to a town called An Hoa, spelled A-N-H-O-A. That was adjacent to a part of Vietnam that we refer to as the Arizona Territory. It was low-lying, heavily infested with water, surrounded by mountains, one of which we referred to as Charlie Ridge because of the number of enemy that were located in those mountains. Dodge City was a part of the Arizona Territory where we were at. We refer to it as Dodge City because of the amount of combat that you ran into every time you went on patrol there. So I was there for about 2 months until I was wounded in an operation called Mameluke Thrust, which occurred in August of 1968. We essentially had 3 days of fighting on entrenched enemy, a compound of tunnels, spider holes, and other areas where they were located and difficult to flush out. On the third day that we were there fighting with them, we assaulted the compound, and I saw enemy troops coming out of tunnels and running, and we were firing at them, and later they were firing back at us, and we did sustain casualties, I being one of them, where I was hit in the side of the leg, that the projectile traveling up through and opening a big scar in the back of my thigh, knocking me to the ground. There were enemy right in that area. They were shooting at us. One was shooting at me directly with an automatic weapon. And I advised some of my comrades that I had been hit. But I was in the open, and I just tried to dig a hole or find a 1-inch hole where I can crawl into. Unfortunately, there weren't any. So the bullets were very close to my head. I could hear the cracking of the bullets. I could feel the wind of the bullet going against my ear, and I really thought that was the end. And funny thing about when you believe you're about to die is, I actually envisioned my mother crying at my funeral during that. And it was at that moment that I prayed, saying, God, please get me out of this mess. And strangely enough, he answered, because the shooting stopped. Another Marine came over, helped pick me up, put me behind cover, where I was much safer. And as soon as he did that, all of the shooting started up again, almost as if I had never stopped. So I considered that a personal intervention on the part of God. The shooting continued, the fighting continued, and now we were beginning to take on more casualties. One of our tanks was hit by a rocket-propelled grenade, an RPG, knocking it out of commission temporarily. A corpsman came over and dressed and bandaged my knee, my wound. And then he went over to another guy in my squad who was down. We believed he was dead. The corpsman straddled his body over him to try to save his life. And while he was doing that, he himself was hit and killed by enemy fire. So they kind of died together like that. The guy in my squad and the corpsman who was trying to save him, one sprawled on top of the other. The tank eventually was able to get started again, and between the tank's firing and our own firing, the enemy automatic weapon that was causing a lot of this damage was finally silenced. I don't know if they were hit, I don't know if they ran away, but they stopped shooting, whatever the case was. Shall I continue?
Well, at this point, I do recall that you ended up being piled into a vehicle along with the gentleman who had perished.
Yes.
In order to be transported to get medical care, and you noticed something about the size of your wound, please.
Yes, I was taken to an area where the casualties were placed. So I was laid down, and I could hear that some of the wounded were in bad shape. People usually die kind of quietly and moaning, not like you see in movies for the most part, where there's a lot of screaming and why did this happen to me and all that. That's Hollywood. And the reality is wounded soldiers and Marines and what have you tend to die kind of quietly. When they're here one moment, the next moment they're gone. We had to be taken to a medevac area, and in order to get there we had to ride a tank. So they took the dead, which included the two that I just talked about, the African-American guy who had been in my squad, who was a friend of mine, was placed on the tank. The corpsman that had tried to save his life and had dressed my wound, and who was a blue-eyed, blonde-haired individual, was also put on top of the tank. They then put me on top of the guy who had been in my squad. So I rode on top of his dead body with the corpsman who had tried to save his life touching me and next to me on our ride out of the area, and other casualties were also placed on that tank, and I think one other tank. I don't really recall how many tanks there were. And we were driven to where there were 3 helicopters waiting for us, and I think a gunny came over and put me on his shoulder, took me to the helicopter, and I entered the helicopter and took a seat. There were several dead in the helicopter over to my right. They were covered by ponchos. I could see their boots. I noted that one individual had pretty large boots. He was like a size 12, but I remember he had one of his dog tags actually tied on the boot itself. And then there were several other wounded. Some were in bad shape. I was in pretty good shape considering. We were medevaced. We were met by orderlies who helped take us into the area where we were treated. The ones who were worse off were treated first. I was treated a little later because I was not dying.
Not dying, but you had a very large hole in your leg.
Yes, after they debrided the wound and took away the dead meat to cut away and cleaned it and the rest of it, I was finally able to look at it, and I noted that I could put my fist into the hole because it was a very meaty part of the leg, and most of it was in the back of the thigh. So it was considered a deep flesh wound, but it was very big and very deep, which is the reason why they sent me to the Naval Hospital in Japan, in Yokosuka, where they eventually stitched it with steel wire. It took 11 stitches of steel wire to put it back together.
You were put back together.
And then
you
I
were
was sent back to Vietnam, correct.
Yes.
I went through a couple more weeks of transferring from the Yokosuka Naval Hospital to Iwakuni, where I was for a couple of days, and then from there took a plane back to Okinawa, where I was there for a few days, and then finally received the orders to go back to Vietnam. So when I arrived back in Vietnam, it was, I believe, October of 1968. The 27th Marine Regiment, who I had been with, had been sent back to the United States. We refer to it as the world. They were sent back to the world. And I ended up with the 1st Marine Regiment, who had taken over the very same area. I was back in exactly the same base camp as I had been with the 27th Marines, just outside of An Hoa, but now with the 1st Marines. So I was put with Delta Company, 1st Battalion, 1st Marines.
And were you promoted your position?
By this time I was a Lance Corporal, which was an E3. We went on several operations. One was Maui Peak. Another one was Mead River. It was on Mead River where we suffered quite a few casualties. I eventually became a squad leader of myself and 3 other men. That's what was left of our squad when I became a squad leader. And when we returned back to base camp 3 weeks later, we were in the bush for this 3-week operation, I was promoted to corporal. So yes, the combat with the 1st Marines in the Arizona Territory was quite frequent and quite bloody, and sometimes a little desperate.
One of the things I remember you said had to do with the weaponry that you were using in terms of its functionality or the lack thereof.
Unfortunately, in 1968, the M16 had a problem with jamming. Now, one of the main arguments regarding the M16 was that as long as you keep it clean, it won't jam. This is a true statement. The problem is that when you're in combat, you're crawling around in the mud. Well, guess what happens to your rifle? Why, it gets dirty. And then when it gets dirty, what tends to happen? It begins to jam. And we were pinned down on Mead River for 20 hours, where we were outflanked and where the snipers went to work on us, really causing a lot of casualties. We had 31 killed and wounded in that particular episode, which included 2 helicopter pilots that were trying to get our casualties out. Well, I would say that maybe about half the M16s that were fired ended up jamming. including mine. You try to clean it, but you can't really clean it because you're not in a position where you can take it apart. So you try to get some oil and try to get it to lubricate again. The AK-47, which is what the enemy had, was a fine piece of weapon. It still is. You can pour mud down the barrel and it doesn't jam. They also had a bigger magazine clip than we did. Our magazine supposedly held 20 bullets. But because the springs in these magazines would often be weak, we only put 18 bullets in because if you loaded it up, the rifle might jam because the spring in the magazine may not be strong enough to push up the next bullet if you had 20 bullets in it. So we would always put 18 bullets in. Whereas the AK-47 had a 30-round banana clip, and theirs, of course, was also an automatic weapon, where you can go semi-automatic or automatic. That, of course, gave the individual enemy soldier a pretty good advantage over us when it came to one-on-one firing of the individual infantryman's weapon. They had a superior weapon, we had an inferior weapon. I hate to say that. We were told that we were given the best supplies in the world at that time, but it's not true. We were not. The procedure of getting weapons in those days in the United States was based on politics and how much the government would have to pay for this weapon versus that one, and special interest, things of that nature. Whereas the communists, interestingly enough, were trying to give their soldiers the best weapons they could. They may not have a whole lot of other things, but they had that. And so they had, on an individual one-to-one ratio, they had the advantage.
I want to briefly ask you about your company, and you were in a position at a point where you were in charge of your men, and you had some difficulties there getting their trust, I believe. They suspected you of being possibly a spy to a certain degree.
Yes, when I got to the 1st Marines, I had already been in Vietnam technically for 7 months. There was a lot of marijuana being used in Vietnam at that time, even in the Marine Corps. It was quite rampant and quite normal, actually. So my being a new guy with time in Vietnam made them suspicious of my being a CID. A CID is short for Crime Investigation Department. They thought I was a narc. And I was not a user of marijuana on a regular basis, although I did try it a few times. Consequently, I noted that I had a problem, namely that I had to watch the enemy in front of me, and I might have to watch some of the Marines behind me who thought I might be a CID. The way I dispensed with that problem was by smoking pot a few times in front of certain people where the word was spread that I wasn't a CID. And that took that threat off of me. Fragging was a real possibility. There was one fragging incident in another company regarding their attempt to get rid of their captain. So fragging was a real possibility. And we're talking about young Marines, 19 years old, seeing death on a regular basis, not wanting to be in a position where they could go to jail for using drugs, and I was quite concerned about some of the responses towards me. Again, I was able to distill that, to rid that by doing what I had to do for the sake of survival.
But you did survive. How did your service end, and when, and why?
I did finish my tour in Vietnam with the 1st Marines. I noted that I was always tired. Fatigue in Vietnam is not like fatigue here. You're so tired that your bones actually ache. And you just want to finish the tour and get home where you can have a nice soft bed to sleep in, a couple of good meals, and be able to stay dry. In February of 1969, I finished my tour and I went to Okinawa for 3 days, where they prepare you to come back. You have to go through certain things. And then 3 days later, I was back in the United States and back in Miami and surprised my parents by knocking on the door. While I was home on leave, I noted that I had symptoms that seemed to be similar to malaria. So I thought, maybe I have malaria. I had been taking the medication, so I couldn't see how that would be the case. So I went to our family physician, who did a good evaluation on me and discovered that I had intestinal hookworm that I had picked up in Vietnam. So that was another reason why I was so tired. I was fighting parasites that were sucking my energy, in addition to being in combat and humping and fighting and doing all of those other things. And I didn't even know it until he told me. And when I got back to, when I arrived in Camp Lejeune, I was treated for it, basically given large pills that expunged the parasites from my GI tract. And that's how that was treated. So I came back, having been wounded, having experienced the possibility of death, having seen things that I have not talked about here, having been concerned about some of my fellow Marines who might think I was a SID, having endured quite a bit of combat in those last few months, having become a squad leader, trying to keep my guys alive, and eventually making it and going home. I then spent 15 months in Camp Lejeune at the Counter-Guerrilla Warfare Center in a part of Camp Lejeune known as Camp Geiger, which was close to the rifle range. My barracks was actually at the rifle range. And the Counter-Guerrilla Warfare Center was basically our training other Marines who were preparing to go either on Mediterranean cruises or who were getting ready to go to Vietnam themselves. We actually had a Vietnamese village set up with little tunnels, and we played VC, or we were coaches. I did all of those things until such time as I was offered an early out, where they gave me a choice. I had 15 months to go on my 4-year enlistment. They gave me a choice. I could either be discharged, honorably discharged as a corporal, or I could be promoted to sergeant and finish my last 15 months as a sergeant. I took the early out, so I was discharged as a corporal. If I had taken a sergeant, I am quite sure that I would have been sent back to Vietnam for a second tour. The tours were 13 months. I had 15 months left. You do your arithmetic. If they were bringing the troops home, Nixon was bringing the troops home little by little, but the ones that were going back were 0300 sergeants, 0300 being the MOSs for the infantry, for the guys who were actually running around in the bush. And I would have been an 0300 sergeant. My chances of going back to Vietnam were quite high. So I had an opportunity for life, and I took it.
And here you are, and after that, you got married, you worked, various different types of work at periods of time, and you found yourself having some consistent issues as a result of your experience. You actually got a degree. Tell us some more about your education, your work experience after Vietnam, and your family life. And how did your experience affect that, your ability to function and be a civilian?
When I got out of the Marine Corps, I wanted to become a police officer. So I applied for college. I was thinking of studying criminology, and I applied to become a police officer. Because I had smoked marijuana when I was younger and when I was in Vietnam, they did not take me into the police force. They said that I would have to be a civilian for X number of time without touching it before they would be able to consider me for the police department. Okay, fair enough. So I started studying psychology, and I went to work as a salesman at Sears. I was a pretty good salesman, but I had a little bit of difficulty sometimes dealing with customers who were difficult. You're kind of at their mercy. As time went on, I noted that I was having nightmares. I was very sensitive to noises. My mother woke me up once because she walked on the carpet barefoot. Her walking on the carpet barefoot actually woke me up in my bedroom. So that's being pretty sensitive. I was also drinking too much, something my mother pointed out to me. And so I began to control my drinking because my mother pointed it out. I didn't stop, but I did begin to control it better. I did not use drugs, but I did drink. And I was a real party animal. I liked to go to parties. During this particular period, I ended up breaking up with my then girlfriend, and I dated numerous other girls. I met my wife on a blind date. We were married 7 months after we met. A funny story about her is that as I was going to my parents' house with a friend of mine to meet my blind date, and his blind date was my sister, I see this beautiful Cuban girl driving a blue Vega on the road, and I'm looking at her and I said, wow, what a knockout. And then, you know, kept going. Lo and behold, my blind date was that very same girl. And I thought, this is my lucky day. So we got married 7 months later, and it was my lucky day. We had 2 children, one of whom is disabled. Our daughter is severely mentally handicapped. She began showing symptoms when she was 7 months old. That same week that we discovered that she was going to be mentally handicapped, that very same week we discovered that my wife was pregnant with our son. So it was down in the dumps on Monday and back up in the clouds on Friday. And that's when I decided to try and join the fire department. By this time, I would have been able to join the police department. In fact, I was an employee at the City of Miami Police Department as a civilian worker. I was what they referred to as a youth caseworker. I had my master's degree by this time in counseling psychology, and I was working with juvenile kids who had been showing problems with the law. The problem was that as much as I liked the job, it didn't pay. My wife had to quit her job because we had a sick daughter and a baby on the way. And so I had to make changes in order to be able to support my family. I joined the fire department, I made it, I got in, and it was the best decision I made for that point in my life. I loved the fire department. As far as the Vietnam issues are concerned, the term post-traumatic stress disorder did not exist at that time. I knew I had a problem, so I took myself to therapy, and my problems were I was concerned of losing self-control. I had visions of violence. I had concerns that I might lose control and become violent with people that might make me angry. I had nightmares during the course of the night where I would feel like I was choking. My wife would always be there to rub my back and gently wake me up until I was able to stop the choking sensations that I was having as a result of the nightmares. That lasted for a long time. I went through the usual paranoia, doing patrols around my house in the middle of the night, looking in the shower and in the bathtub to see if there was anybody hiding in there. You go through these crazy phases, and I went through them. But I dealt with it, and I had great support from my wife, and I did, again, take myself to private therapy. And as time went on, I was able to slowly begin getting a hold of the panic attacks that I had been having. And although I still have nightmares, they're not like what it was. The nightmares could be quite real in a very bad sort of way. Monkeys shooting at you with AK-47s and laughing at you as your friends are dying and as you're drowning in mud, and very, very intense kinds of nightmares. And that is what happens to soldiers who go and experience war. I'm sure since man began having wars against one another.
Sir, I want to ask you just a couple more closing questions. And I really appreciate all the detail you gave us about your personal experience. When you left, were you given any medals for your service?
I have received several medals, which are not any big deal. They're really kind of a commonplace. But the ones I'm most proud of is the Presidential Unit Citation for our work on Operation Meade River for the 1st Marines. I'm also proud of the Combat Action Ribbon that I received. You have to be in combat for at least a month in order to receive that. I was in combat a whole lot longer than that. And I'm also proud of the Purple Heart that I received. I'm particularly proud of those 3 medals. The other medals is the National Service medal. Everybody gets that if they're on active duty. The Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry that was given by the then government of South Vietnam to anyone who served in combat in Vietnam, and the Vietnamese campaign and service medals. They're two different medals. So altogether, I think I had a total of 7 awards between the 5 medals and the 2 ribbons.
You talked a lot about war for everyone, war for you personally, what happened to your friends, what's happened in history with war. What do you want to leave people with in terms of your experience, your own experience with the military, your combat? How would you like to close this interview for others that might be watching in the future?
I would like to mention that my best friend in my youth joined the Army and was in Vietnam the same time I was. His nickname was Denny. I'll leave it at that. And he was like a brother to me, and he was killed in Vietnam at the same time that I was there. I was advised of that by my unit chaplain. My mother wrote the chaplain so the chaplain could tell me that Denny had been killed. When I came home, the very first day, I had my father drive me to the cemetery so I could visit his grave. I think of him every day. And I still have very strong emotional feelings about his passing at the age of 19. What I would say to those that are listening regarding war is try and give the veterans a break. Try to give them a break. They can be a real pain in the butt, I know. But there's a reason for it, particularly to those veterans that have actually experienced combat, have actually been hurt, have seen death, have perhaps inflicted death. You don't have to kiss their butt, but you can show them a little respect. And I didn't get that respect when I first came back from Vietnam. I was actually asked on a couple of occasions how many babies did I kill in Vietnam. Things are much better now. Now I'm actually told, thank you for your service. And I appreciate that. It's late. I could have used that 50 years ago, but it's better late than never. And make sure that you do that for the young veterans who are coming back from all of these conflicts and all of these wars that seem to be taking place everywhere. Now it's not only just guys, now it's the gals too. We're getting a lot of veterans who are women and who have lost legs and arms in combat, and they can use a little bit of respect themselves. As far as war is concerned, the soldier always has to follow orders and always has to do what their government stipulates. I would just hope that the government of the United States does all it can to try to prevent war and to try to prevent conflict before actually embarking on such oftentimes necessary endeavors, because the cost is bigger than you know. The cost is bigger and more tumultuous than what people will ever realize. It's a very small percentage of Americans that actually serve their country, and they pay a big price. That's all I have to say, unless you have more questions.
Nelson, I'm very appreciative of everything you told us. Thank you so much again for your service.
Thank you.